The skeleton is a fascinating, structure, a set of structures. All of these crazy shapes and forms that you see have a purpose. The skeleton is its baseline purpose is that it's about stability, protection, especially like here at the rib cage, skull and spine, all about protecting the most important thing is our central nervous system. So initially about protection, but then stability and support. But then we have to be able to move all these crazy things. And so no skeletal muscle just sits on a bone and just does this. All muscles cross a joint line and connect one bone to another so that when they pull like strings on a puppet, they're going to move said bone at the joint line. So all these shapes and knobs and crazy, knobs and grooves and everything, those are places for muscles to anchor onto, literally like handholds. If anybody's watched like crazy rock climbers, anybody watch that Free Solo documentary? Anything like that? My references are already completely gone. That's only a few years old. But the other reference I've used, but that doesn't apply almost to anybody. If you ever try to glue something to glass, you can't because it's perfectly smooth. You have to use sandpaper and something so that the glue can kind of embed down into the pores and have something to hold on to. Even when it's small, it needs something to latch onto, not a perfectly flat, smooth surface. So all these crazy shapes that are all meant to be places for those muscles to anchor onto. And one of our main goals today is, as we're working our way through our routine, is going to be palpating areas of the skeleton, identifying vaguely what they are, and that will either tell you safe areas to work, areas to avoid, and then moving forward it'll also be a way where you can identify where particular muscles are. If I want to know where muscles are that move the scapula, well, they're going to be there, here, here. I want to know muscles that move the arm, well, they're just going to be either here on the front, the anterior side, or in the back, the posterior side, and then maybe on the side. The initial pattern we're going to be following is this idea of people starting face down in what's called prone position. So instead of saying face down or on your tummy, well, that's what you'd say to a client. I've never said just lay prone. Some people might know, but I always tell them, we'll start you face down, underneath the sheets, etc. But this is typically how everyone's going to start. Laying on their stomach, hands turned over like that. And this is the position that therapists kind of get lost in for too long. Although this protocol sets you up to work on each area a couple of times, this would be more like a 90-minute session. I'll be impressed if you're like punching through it when we're really getting going, not in these early phases, but in less than 2 hours. If you can do that in 90 minutes, that's a pretty big win. Then moving forward, and this will be a month or two, it'll be a couple months, we'll be trying to figure out how to edit that down. And some of that will be your own personal preferences. I'm really open to not trying to create clones of myself, Sarah, Sandy, Logan, anybody. There's going to be a lot of offering many options, and there's going to be the occasional person that can only lay in prone and supine. There are going to be people that can only lay on their sides. And so you're going to have the experience to be able to adapt to that. But you are going to also have just your preferred routine. What is the place you start and where you end that seems to flow the nicest for you, that is the most comfortable for you? And some of those questions are completely arbitrary and subjective. You get to just to say, I like working on the feet more in this position or another, even though I'll tell you side lying is by far the best position for some specific areas. But starting out in this next few months, ideally within the next 2 months, to be honest, picking a routine and then sticking with it so that you get it just kind of solidly, fully, my brain, memorized, is where you want to be. And then you can start adapting out from that. All right. So first things first, making sure our bolsters are correct. And then where everybody wants us to start working, the number one issue in the healthcare world is the low back. So starting here tends to make sense. It fits a little bit more in the traditional classical model, so it won't make you seem too alien. Once you get to using sideline work, yes, that'll be unique, sadly. But as I make contact, I could be thinking about lots of things. I could be thinking about chakras, all kinds of stuff, but I can palpate and navigate and figure out a lot here. And so to start with, we're gonna have thinking about the spine. If we're here at the low back, and am I on, it would be like reverse. I'm starting over at 7. So you can see me, but try to mirror that. Thinking the lumbar spine. This will be this freely mobile space. Some people, it's gonna feel like there's more room here or less room. The areas to be able to identify and navigate are gonna be the tops of the pelvis. And where does the pelvis start and the spine end, or where does the pelvis end and the spine start? It's distinguishing the pelvis from the hips. We'll come back to that. But right here, usually, and you'll see, even with that pillow there, there's gonna be a little bit of an arch here. The lumbar spine and the cervical spine have these concavities to them. So resting my hand here, and again, depending on a person's body, you may be able to feel more or less, but these projections you're gonna feel of the spine, that's just the spinous process. And for anybody that can see, they're like sails or fins, like shark fins coming off from the spine. So the spine is housing that spinal cord and protecting it pretty well. Being here is not gonna harm anything. But we do not wanna push really directly right down on those spinous processes, but they're pretty thin. And there's muscles right next to them. And that will start, between that, the ribs, and the scapulas, this will be an area that's just kind of messy for you. And you have to just kind of get used to contacting and working your way through each area, and it'll get easier. So lumbar spine, spinous process, these floating ribs, all right? That's one that people have to be careful about. Up here, it's pretty simple. Navigating the scapulas, it's distinguishing, just like I talked about, thinking about the pelvis versus the hip. Now you have to start thinking about what a scapula is compared to a shoulder joint, right? So a lot of times people will kind of just talk about both together. All right, now, if I'm gonna work in these areas, one thing I do have to be conscious of is how much I'm reaching. With good biomechanics, like this table, for example, would be just a little bit low for me. It's a very high end. This one was donated. I don't know how old it is. It's been a workhorse. I think it's got to be at least 20 years old. So don't mind some of the creaks. One thing that gets therapists when they're working on the back is people want lots of pressure right by the spine, but that is at the center of the table. This will be the place when you're working on the body where you're reaching the most. Everywhere else, you can pull the limb over more and it'll be closer to the edge, you're not gonna be reaching as much. The limbs, it's just not as much of an issue. But part of what can make your life a lot easier is just repositioning where the client's body is. And so the big one there is just moving the arm off to the side. People get worried that when they move the client that's going to be some kind of big disruption and ruin their relaxation experience. And it's not. You'll get used to being able to rhythmically include either joint movement as part of the therapy or same faces. Everything all right over there?
Yeah.
Okay.
We're just making sure that everything's covered because you're leaving early.
Well, more like maybe 4. Well, she wants to push it that close. I was hoping that maybe we had talked maybe closer to 4.
I was just wondering so I can like get back here and help sit her out.
Yeah. Don't be on too much of a pressure. And if it doesn't happen, everyone will survive. I will survive. So no pressure. We're ideally closer to 4, but some family things on my side. I got it. But if I don't make it in time, I'll just be yelled at. It'll be fine. Okay. Now this first stretch, I promise, is all kind of messy. Once we get going, it all starts sinking in better. But this is a thing where, I mean, starting out, you're kind of getting lambasted with a lot, but little things like this can make such a difference. Now, let me scoot this person out just a little bit. This repositioning, some of those tables, we looked at a few tables last week, the ones that have like the sling for the arms here at the front. I mean, that's what they're set up for. And it's really convenient. If you end up having a table that has one of those, great, use it. But I've used a stool and a chair. The athletes always wanted to be on their phones, so they were like this with their phone constantly through the whole massage. But I had always used at least position the arm over here, which then allowed me to get to an area where people want you to work a lot, but then I don't have to be worried about contacting my body with their arm and their hand, right? So I don't need to be putting my belly right on their arm. That's like avoiding contact that isn't with like the parts of your body you're massaging is really the only parameter you need to start off with like thinking about safety and making sure a person doesn't have like a sense of like misinterpreted touch and all that kind of stuff. All the weirdness, you know, somebody comes in, they've never had massage before, they're nervous and skittish. Your first clients are all going to be new. So I'm going to always be framing things that you're starting off with somebody that has no idea and that you have to be especially careful with. Your draping has to be super pristine, and the way you work on the body, making sure you are able to work in all these areas, but then again, not have to worry about something that could cause a problem. And one of the simplest ones is walking by a person's arm and hand and inadvertently making contact with them like that. It's not quite as much a problem for women in this profession, but there have been issues for male therapists. I had to do a big think tank thing on this. Here's the thing, I've been doing this over 20 years and never had a problem, right? Even being a young guy in the profession, all of it, but I had a big group of educators and other therapists where there have been big issues of people walking by, hitting a person's hand with like sanitizer bottles and stuff like that, and the person getting weird about it. So it's one of those where why not just, and again, this was the big revelation. We'll move their arm out of the way. You don't have to worry about it. Isn't that a better solution? And the other cool element here, what it also tells me, if a person can lay comfortably in each of these positions, that will be an assessment for their shoulder. If a person cannot put their arm in all these positions, then I would know there's something up with either their scapula or their shoulder, and that would tell me that I have to be careful. You're gonna have people coming in, they fill out their paperwork and they tell you their issues, but you're still gonna have to be doing some assessment to confirm like, 1, what's going on, and 2, is everything safe to work on? So starting out, I'm gonna tell you to do this. You don't have to do both arms. One person, they could be laying asymmetrically, like this. But when I'm gonna come here to the low back, what I first start with, I contact, and then I find their arm, reposition them all the way. I confirm like comfortable to lay with your arm here, comfortable to lay with your arm here. Cool. I'm gonna just have you hang out there for a little while. I work here and then we'll move it back. First time clients, I have to be a little more, I have to speak a little more. After they've worked, gone through the session once or even a few times, then they know what to expect and I don't have to be nearly as diligent with explaining everything. But now, I don't have to worry. That's out of there. Some of the muscles here are even kind of put on length, so it'll be a good thing all around. And then I'm able to work here in the low back. So now I'm going to try to make myself actually just go through the pattern. Let me, for the sake of the mirroring of this, actually follow it right in cycle. So I come here, first thing, making sure everything's bolstered. If it's not, then I need to put some things in. You would just make an approximation and usually have to coach a person where they put that pillow. And I go, okay, arm comfortable here, arm comfortable there, great. We're gonna have you hang out there. And then here come the biomechanics elements. My table height is right about where my hip joint is, not the top of my pelvis, not the belt line, right here, that bony projections that you can find. So power pose, that's the pelvis, down here, the actual hip joint. Okay, now where do I stand? I have them positioned. Now how am I gonna stand? Standing like this, I can work a little bit, but usually I'm gonna not reach as much when I'm on an angle. So, and not this angle, because now I'm gonna really have to turn over to the side. So it's usually gonna be, there's gonna be a few cases where this isn't the case, but typically my fingers and hands will be pointing across the table. Okay, this is one side to the other side. My elbow will be pointed towards this side of the table. My fingers will be pointed across to the other side of the table. And this forearm can be in kind of any orientation, here to here. It's going to be most comfortable somewhere in between. So standing like this, you're going to be uncomfortable, and like this, those are all, you know, closer to stressing your actual shoulder. So somewhere in between, just wherever is comfy. So you see like that, this 45-degree angle going across. That's usually where I live. And remember that graceful dance, all that. So I'm here. I usually take a step off to the side. Here's my spot, off to the side, good to go. And then a couple directions, usually at an angle, and I do go across this way, but you're gonna be able to get closer to the spine on this angle like this. So here and here. Then I'm gonna be navigating those ribs. It's not like doing this is wrong, but starting out, beginners have a challenge usually avoiding these floating ribs. It takes me a little while to get you comfortable with like leaning far enough forward to be right next to the spine. Everyone gets weird and scared about being close to the spine. So you're gonna have a tendency to have your arms further over to the lateral sides of the body. When you do that just here, you can hit those floating ribs. And unless somebody is super brittle, it's not gonna be a problem other than being just a little uncomfortable. So rather than going in this direction, I tend to tell you, start off, you're standing like this for the low back anyway. Now you're gonna just be taking back steps to get to this lower thoracic. Anywhere where the ribs are, you have the lumbar spine, thoracic spine, cervical spine. Anywhere where the ribs touch, that's the thoracic spine. So if I just work here in the low back a little bit and take a back step, and I'm here, the ribs for breathing, it's better to try to push them downward towards the pelvis anyway, and you won't hit those sharp ends. It's the other value of having their arm up like this, it'll move the scapula up, so you'll have a little bit more room here, okay? So for just those two areas, I mean, you can use your hands some. I tend to use my hands for like lighter work and getting the lotion distributed, but these two areas, it's all forearms. And that's basically all it looks like. And you just would spend more time, do a few directions, all that. Now I'm here. Now I want to make more room for myself. The scapula is a crazy thing. These skeletons are bolted onto the ribs, but for us, it's actually fully freely mobile. It's considered a joint where it slides on the ribs, but the only place it actually has a true jointed connection is at your collarbone, the clavicle. So everywhere here it can slip and slide in every single direction. When you have somebody's arm up like this, or even down like this, a lot of people when their arms are like this, their shoulders will inadvertently elevate or shrug upward, and you'll have less room here. And there's plenty of people, I'm sure, friends, family members, or yourselves that would like good work here between the scapula and the spine up into like that shoulder area. Right? With the classic thumbs and knee, but you'll have more space here by just taking the arm from here off to the side. And I can even hold the arm there if I want, and then I can choose either forearm. I tend to pick this one because then I can kind of have control of where the arm is. You know, they're paying for touch, so I can be kind of holding the upper arm, the next area I'm going to go, stabilize the shoulder and everything, and work like this. This is like a place where I do have my arm a bit more, you know, vertical as opposed to at an angle. I could work like this too, but then I just have to be careful that I don't put my belly on the back of their head. So that's why I tend to suggest starting off like this. Now with this, and I can angle my arms. So what we discovered a new way of teaching this idea is it's an L or a V. So that how much I flex my elbow, right? If I make more of an L shape, it's not perfect, I'm going to be more flat and flush, coming more straight down, right? If I make more of a V, then I'm going to come more on an angle. So here, be right on the side of the ribs. So for this area, that wouldn't make sense. I would want more of an L for this area. For here, right between the scapula and the spine, I'd want more of an L. But if I want to work more on this area, which is where a lot of people want extra work, then I make more of a V. And then that'll naturally make my contact come more on the upper portion of the shoulder. Now, I'm already touching the arm. I'm already on this side of the body. I might as well go to that. So the next part would be here. So following this order, okay, that's there, 1, 2, 3, and then we're just gonna work away from the low back up, and then from the arm down. So upper arm. Here is a good place to just practice palms. I would stress for the back, since you're just kind of getting the lay of the land. Forearms are your best tool here. Then palms. And stay standing here. This will all get revisited while you're practicing. But if you stand like this, you're going to make sure you don't hit an artery or a nerve. Okay? So this is a part of, you can start learning the body by initially palpating your own body. If you rest your hand right on the top of your shoulder, so do this with me, you should feel at the edge a big bony plateau, right? Even the most muscly bodybuilder in the world, you'll be able to feel that bony plateau. That's this crazy projection of your scapula, okay? Now you're gonna work your way down and feel the whole outside of your arm, right? There's nothing delicate over there. It's all just muscle and bone, right? But if we go on to that's the lateral side of the arm. Now go to the medial side of your arm. Now don't push aggressively here, but that should feel like you would have to be a lot more careful, right? So your body's built with some protection defaults in it, even where things are located. That the main nerve and artery are here on the medial side of the arm, and on the medial side of the thigh. That way, if I'm in danger, I can just curl up like a turtle and everything's protected, okay? So we have to be careful here. Not quite as much with the leg has way more muscle protecting it. But with the upper arm, here on the medial side, you just have muscles in the front and the back, and there's a valley here where it's very easy to directly push on the artery and the nerve. So how do I make you not feel scared about working on the upper arm now? Is stand here and work out in this direction. You can't hit those, right? You're over here. If you were to go over here, then you might. Or more especially, if you leave a person's arm like this and you do that, then you might. You know, as you learn the anatomy, you'll be able to find ways of navigating that and confirming like you're not actually on the nerve and the artery. So, but If I have my easiest go-to for you, it's just being here. It ends up patterning very nicely. I ended this side of the back here, my hands here. I just stand up, change my feet, and I'm right into the next part. And turn the arm completely over, that would be quite the sensation. Then if I want to do something else, a lot of times if I'm thinking about how to work on the body, I'll try to tell you to work at least in like 2 directions. Some areas it's harder, some parts of the torso are harder to do this, but with the limbs, I can work, I'm using the bone as a directional sign. Like I can work across the grain with it, or with the grain. That'd be more terminology with the muscles, but I can work perpendicular to it, or parallel with it. Depending on the table height, see how like here I'm bending a little bit further down. This wouldn't be, I can make this work, but I have to get into more of a lunge stance. So I may use a soft fist or a palm here. Then forearm, lower arm, and we'll work here. This would be a place where I break one rule. Remember this whole idea of having my arm with my elbow pointed one side, here's the other way. If I do this, my hand's going to be touching their body. And I can make that work, but it ends up angling my arm. It makes things kind of wonky. So this is one place where I flip it, I protect the elbow, and then I work this way. That's kind of my personal preference because it keeps my hand from touching the side of their body. And I feel like I'm just more flush with their whole forearm area. Here, here, and then we're 2 hands. And we'll look at all those crazy delicate things, but get a sense of just how the overall design of this is laid out. We have our spine and our ribs making up the central part of our skeleton. That's the axial skeleton, but then we get to the actual appendages. That's called the appendicular skeleton. And those are just terms thrown out there. But the design, we have an elephant ear shaped thing. Elephant ear shaped thing. 1 long bone, 1 long bone, 2 long bone, 2 long bone, a bunch of little bones, a bunch of, call them little bones, digits. Digits. So the map and design is very uniform once you get to the appendages, even though they can be shaped different. Like everything here is smaller and more mobile. Everything here is bigger and has more stability to it and can take more, weight. But the overall design is pretty much the same. Just remembering, when we think about the hands, those little bones only occupy like this much space. And then you're to all these crazy long ones, okay? Same thing with the foot when we get there. There it's more like you divide it in half. But the hand, I just kind of always want to point out, you only have this tiny little collection down here. And then it's all long stuff, okay? Now, we've done 1/2 of the body, 1/2 of the upper body. And I can leave them like this. I'm gonna swoop around and I'll show you one crowd favorite where it's like learning, instead of doing pushing, almost all of our therapy when we're working is gonna be leveraging and pushing into their body, right? Be this, this, this. Changing up how you use your body and doing a pull action is often just a relief to you and can be a way to, if I use my fingers, it's usually in that kind of orientation. So this area where people always want a lot of work, I swoop around like that, grab a hold, and I can do a nice pull. I can get kind of a stretch and all that, and it gets me all the way to the other side, and I'm here on number 7 now. And then in real time, work. Call it like 3-ish applications. Once we're actually on skin and not over clothing, so maybe we double it. Maybe make it 6 and slowing it down. Right? Starting off, I might do a few light ones, 2, 3, and then I'll apply a little bit more pressure. 1. The more pressure you apply, the slower you should go. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. It's very boring to watch, but the person laying on the table is having a great time. Say the lower thoracic part. Now I'm going to reorient where the arm is, and I'm here. There. That's an L. Now for a V, if I want to work more in the upper trap spot, hands right here to take me to the upper arm. Work my way down. Maybe go up. Follow the bone, go across the bone, with the grain, against the grain, whatever terminology works. And then here for the forearms. Can't see me as good, so the hands, I'll show with the hands using a soft fist. Ends up working really good. I tried early on, I'm gonna really stress having to use everything possible but your fingers, just to get that initial learning. And you can default to this really easy and naturally. This will be the unnatural thing. So challenging yourself to get used to the mechanical strangeness of using a forearm and stuff will be the biggest challenge. All right, okay, we're doing okay-ish. Next then will be thinking about this area. And oh no, it's a pelvis and everybody's scared. It's okay. So the glutes are, you can't, a few of you can see the picture, but these are very important muscles, okay? Everybody gets weird about it because yes, it's also a butt. All right? Oh no. Underneath gluteus maximus is a whole bunch of really important muscles, which is where that sciatic nerve passes through. So if you're gonna have people with low back problems, sciatica is a big one. If you're actually gonna help these people, you need to be comfortable with how to work in this area safely. Of all the things, me being able to help with hip replacement, and especially in sports, the thing that really defined me was that I knew how to work in these areas. And therapists that completely avoid them or don't know how to work in them are going to be on an island of not being able to do stuff that's more in that therapeutic, truly helping people territory. All right. Now, I'm not going to use an open palm or even a soft fist here. This is the perfect place for a forearm because yes, it is the glutes. I want a person to feel comfortable and safe, right? So a way to make that feel more, less of an invasive thing is going to be not using your hands at all. Forearm, I'm good to go. So forearm right here, I have to identify this edge, the top of the pelvis, this iliac crest. I want to be right there in between, and this will be its own crazy thing. So you're going to be initially, contacting and moving stuff around. If I do this, maybe the body will start to turn, all of that. But I also want to be able to identify this. So when we're practicing with each other, I want everybody to feel safe and comfortable. We're going to baby step our way through the process of being the client and everything. I'm used to the nerves and the jitters with all this. But you want to be able to, we're not here at the midline. You're all the way over here on the outside, needing to palpate and find this. You need to be able to find this ridge up top. And you need to be able to find this bony knob that tells you where the actual hip joint is. That way you know the places where to put your forearm, which is going to be right here in the middle of that elephant ear. And then here, it's really going to be posterior to that hip joint, this greater trochanter. That's the name for the bony chunk here. There's the hip joint. And then there's this big, huge, bony knob that a lot of muscles attach onto. I want to be able to find that so that I can and it ends up not being hard. I find the top of the pelvis, forearm right there, and then I go down just a tiny bit. If I include this joint movement, it creates an impression, a sensation, everything that we're doing this for the sake of the hip. It makes it less that I'm just squashing a tuchus, right? So there is a whole thing about the impression of this, but also how am I able to do compression? Typically, you're not going to drape this area. The only time I ever drape this area these days is for working on scar tissue. Okay. There are plenty of establishments here in the States. They don't want you draping, they don't want you moving underwear or anything, right? Clients will be required to wear underwear, all of that. It's a different dynamic like in Europe, I can promise you that. But here, it's a much more modest dynamic. So you're gonna have to learn how to work on this whole area over the sheet as your main go-to. And that's gonna mean, just like working over clothing, it's gonna be a compression. And then how do you have something more happening so the tissue's changing shape and there's at least a quality to it that feels like massage. If I just squash something and sit there for a while, that gets pretty boring, right? So if I squash the area, move an adjacent joint, those muscles are shortening and lengthening, and it has a sensation and quality to it. And 2 main spots there, and you're done. And you're already a better therapist than most people. Isn't that amazing? Then you're to the legs. Not too hard here. If anything, it's going to be figuring out how to reposition. Somebody has themselves like this. You're going to want to be, when we get to draping, we're always going to be mindful of that, but getting the leg closer to the edge so that you're not reaching as far. And then same thing, being mindful of where your hand is. You know, I don't want my hand positioned like this. I'd have my arm angled down like this. And rather than trying to fight to do something like this, that's where my biomechanics are gonna get crazy crooked. So I stand on angles, and rather than trying to do one big long stroke like this, I mean, you see how I get all kinds of twisted? I'm gonna turn that into like 2 or 3 small strokes like this. And then I'm standing at the knee, I go up the hill. Going uphill will always give you more of an advantage, because going downhill you'll slip just like going down a hill. I just swap my stance from here to here, and we're back up a hill. And contact with palms, all that. But here I'm not as worried. You know, the legs are made of tougher stuff. You'll have an easier time with that. With feet and everything, we'll play with a few things that you can do here, but I will try to stress for you on biomechanics to limit the work in prone as much as possible. You know, here you'd be reaching a lot if it's a shorter person. The nature of the arch of the foot, it's, you know, stuck here more medial. So in order for you to even work on that well, you'd have to get on an angle. Worst things people do is they end up being like this, or like this, and ways where you could work and not be quite as crooked. It's not like I don't do some stuff here, but to start out, that's the less advantageous one. Let me get us to going on sideline. Now, this is where this could stay for some people. I've had a few shoulder issues in the past when I've even consulted with people about what do they do when they sleep. You know, does anybody here have any shoulder problems? Everybody here is very healthy and good. That's great. That makes practice a lot easier, I promise. Nobody has to be as worried. If people do, and they lay on their sides, then that can be kind of an issue. But if I leave that pillow there, and we have a person scoot down, they're gonna be laying, we want their head off of this, all right? That's for their safety and for yours. There we go. We'll start with, yes, very comfortable. But I could create a pocket for their shoulder joint. Now, nobody here is going to be forced to just endure something that's uncomfortable. If you don't prefer having the pillow there, then no big deal. Take it completely out. And that's the only thing that therapists get annoyed about with having that pillow underneath the abdomen in prone, is when the person turns on their side, having to get this out while they're having that turn happen. Then you either have this available for the head, or my preference is to have a pillow already ready to go. I tend to use the face cradle along with a pillow, just because it holds it. A lot of my people were bigger, but this can be a nice hugging pillow for across the torso. And that, I mean, if I'm gonna really give like the therapists have issues with the draping in sideline and little extra things. I talked about having the towel available last week, but having a pillow to hug in the front. Also, one, it's just more comfortable, but then it protects the whole chest area. And I tend to be like, if you have it available, if you can challenge yourself to have one extra pillow available in the session, this ends up being just for your mental load, a better thing. And they're gonna be more comfortable. And if they don't like it, then oh well. But better to kind of have more than you need so you can adapt with people than the other way around. All the things for, because I mean, we're talking about, you know, one, how to go through this pattern so you have some kind of sense of what to do in a session. But then within all that, it's going to turn into, how do I make this feel like an actual massage where I'm doing good work and helping somebody and also having them feel safe, protected, and comfortable. So between the bolstering and some extra pillows, it just goes a long way without you having to navigate it. I would much rather do that than be in a position where I have one pillow, one bolster, and one sheet, right? That ends up being challenging. And I have had to navigate that, where all I have is no bolsters, maybe a pillow or two, not of the right shape and size or anything, and a sheet that was too small on top of it. And that does create anxiety for me, and that isn't a fun time. So why would I do that to myself if I don't have to? All right, now we're here to working and sideline. And now those that have come from people that have worked with us, has anybody actually had, I'm gonna ask these questions, I'm sure nobody's gonna answer, that's okay. Has anybody had a massage where they've actually been put on their side?
No.
You have, that makes sense. You have the sphere of Cliff around you.
Yeah,
So.
it was with Cliff too.
But this is very common, that it gets delegated only to prenatal. And that is very silly, okay? Now, I get it a little bit for time management. When we get to that, people tend to just be like, you know what? I'll change my body and find a way to work on everything in prone and supine. And that's more the classical routine, and sometimes we're just fitting in. You know, you come into a working environment and you don't like being the only one doing things a certain way. I promise you that it'll be a case where it's one of your best selling points, because you'll be the only one, obviously, that does it. And this area, for example, where we're gonna start, there is no way to effectively work here without the therapist having to really strain their hands. You're gonna end up exerting a lot more work. You're gonna have to use your fingertips, which are a sharper point of contact, all that stuff. But when you finally do feel how much better it is to have somebody work here. Anybody that's had tension headaches? Anybody a headache person? Okay. And that base of the skull stuff, where you wish somebody would just pry your skull up off your spine, and it's a little aggressive. But it's one thing that I was challenged with a ton, right? So one of the first areas I was really comfortable working with people was the neck, because I had a lot of neck problems. And it looks aggressive, but here's the weird thing, pounds per square inch, this is much sharper, okay? Even if a person's laying supine and I'm up underneath their head, all that, these are sharper points of contact. This is a broader base. I can hit a lot more muscles all at once like this. And it's actually safer, even though it looks like I'm doing a crazy wrestling move, right? So, all kinds of stuff. TMJ, everything. I can do much better work for the muscles and structures of the head and the scalp in this position. There's some stuff supine that, you know, for the face and the forehead I can do better. But for the temples and the jaw and all that, there's muscles on the back of your skull that are pretty important. This ends up being like the favorite part for most people, is this head smush. Like a really good scalp massage. But there's muscles here too that you can't get to all in supine. So here, I can just kind of work on everything. You have muscles here on the forehead, the sides, your temples, and one's right here on the very back of your skull. And then your scalp is kind of one big shared tendon. Then we're to the neck area. And right there I can forearm here for that whole upper trap spot. This is where a lot of people want a ton of pressure anyway. And then I can work here for the neck. I'm very used to everybody being too scared. I will forgive you if you want to start with just contacting the scapula and using a palm here. I'll grant you that, but eventually I'll nudge and be like, start using a forearm here. Okay, now we're good. Now I'm gonna move this so you can see better. But this area we're not gonna practice a ton. I just am gonna want you to get used to the idea of doing joint movement here. The draping and stuff, and navigating the scapula to the ribs, it's one of the more frustrating places for beginning therapists to get comfortable, because you just have a lot of skeleton to navigate, right? And that's where I want to have at least a strong visual awareness, of where all this is. You don't have to know every name, but you have to know, like, when I take a person, when a person's laying there and I'm feeling their shoulders, like, it's this crazy big bony plateau that I'm feeling. And then there's the upper ribs, and then that's their skull. That's a huge concavity. That's all filled in with muscles and stuff. But here, we have muscles that come up here. Now, it's kind of the armpit area, but there's a whole collection of muscles when people have shoulder issues that really are more about how their scapula is moving. This area does not get worked on. And it's delicate, but at the very least, we're gonna work on the idea of like moving the shoulder so we could do some stretches, mobility stuff if we had to, but ideally we get to a point where we're gonna be comfortable working here as well. And this doesn't have to be big, like it's just there. It's about the scapula. You can't get to that very good in any other position, is the point. Ways to work on the low back. A lot of times the issues of the low back are not about the spine, they're about the stuff on the sides of the back. Therapists really hurt themselves working on the back, especially too much in prone, and they work on the neck too much in supine. You can get a lot more of that pulled off here with way better angles for you because you're not reaching all the way across to the middle of the table. And I can have a person lean back, or they can adjust themselves. It's always going to be, you're going to hear it just until you're really sick of it, that you want the actual position to get more stuff done. It's this. All right. Now, can't see as good. I'm just going to move this bolster out of the way, so I'm not going to do both sides to save us a little bit of time. But this bottom leg, same thing. If I change how my arm is angled, looking at this bolster, you have a lot of muscle on your upper legs. Less on the lateral side. Out here is pretty much just the IT band, okay? But a good chunk of muscle here, good chunks of muscle here, so anterior and posterior, and a lot of muscle here on the medial side, okay? But people don't work on it because they're scared of working on the inner thigh, right? So how do I navigate that? And one of these areas, I consider this usually a cautionary delicate zone just because what the impression that can occur if somebody does this with open palm, right? We have to be aware, regardless of what environments we're in, we have to be aware of trying to like make sure a person's as comfortable as possible and navigate all of this without you even having to worry about it. Thus, a forearm. And if I have a big bunch of muscle here and a big bunch of muscle here, that's where the L and the V shapes of my forearm will play in. So I want to be on those medial muscles there. I want to be on those posterior muscles, the hamstrings. Then so I can work on the hamstrings, these muscles on the posterior side of the body, actually way better in sideline. The way they attach onto this thing, this part of the pelvis called the ischium. So they track more medial. They go from both sides of your knee and they go up way more medial. So when a person's laying in prone, if you work on this part of the leg, you're gonna feel just bone. You're gonna feel that on your own bodies, right? If you just kind of find your hip, right here, there's not muscle. The muscle is all the way over here. So I want to work on somebody's actual hamstrings. This ends up being the better position. So L, V, and I just keep my elbow oriented towards the pelvis, and I don't have to worry about anything. Change on those calves, all those big calf muscles. For the feet, the arch of the foot is the most mobile section where there are more muscles. Right here, it's aimed right up at me. So the only thing I tend to do here is I'll kind of hug the toes, but then I can use a forearm here. And that ends up being way more effective. Between that and here, I promise you it actually feels better than all this delicate work, if for the no better reason for when people are ticklish. You have anybody that's ticklish on their feet, it's hard to work on. That's not conducive to relaxation, right? Anybody ticklish? I saw a few. Okay. Well, be ticklish is light touch, small contact. So firmer application, more static, not like a lot of dragging, but like just a good squash with some movement to it. That usually avoids all that ticklish element, and it gets a whole lot more done. You're working on the muscles and you're getting all these bones to shift and move. So in terms of it being effective and feeling better, you can't beat that orientation. Again, you can only do it in sideline. But that was my selling point. I was pretty green still when I got into the sports stuff. The biggest advantage I had was just knowing how to navigate these positions so that I could get to things from different angles. And simply because of working on stuff in these different angles than people were used to, it defined me as something special. And most of it really is that. You want, like, somebody comes in and they have a problem with an area, it's your first go-to as well. Work on it several times from several different angles in several different positions. And rather than you worrying about a particular technique, then all it is work on it the best you can in each position. And you will naturally hit the structures and the muscles from different orientations, and that'll take you most of the way. Right here. So the top leg, we need a big square stable bolster. As I said, I have these available for you, or you can make your own, all that. IT bands. How many people have heard somebody talk about their IT bands? And all that, right? So I want better orientation for working on that. There you go. The rest of the lower leg, you have a bunch of muscles here on the front and the side here. But this is a great place when we get to kneading, where I can literally work on every single muscle related to the lower leg, the ankle, the toes, and make it feel really good. Squashing stuff like this part of the calf, putting pressure on it in prone and supine sometimes can be pretty sensitive. People can have like trigger points and lots of that tight stuff on their calves. Doing something that's more gentle, like a kneading or kind of like this, like a pull and a push, kind of sandwiching it all, will feel more gentle. And it fits really nicely in more of a relaxation routine. This part can be made, this translating down to the foot, can be made to feel really, really good. And is really excellent because of having the leg elevated for people who have swollen feet and swollen lower legs. So all of this, as I'm showing you too, will apply to helping people with edema and lymphatic issues. Anybody with swollen legs, all of this is going to help because of the nature of using the bolstering and hitting stuff from multiple angles too. But I can use forearms if I need to have more pressure, use my palms, works really good. And then here ends up being one of the best parts of the foot. People always think it's only the arch of the foot. You got tons, and the foot carries you around all day, every day. There's a lot going on here. So if I want a pattern, I'm pretty mechanical in how I work. So if I want the best go-to for achieving relaxation, is I make sure I hit the hands and the feet at least 2 times. So in this pattern, if I work on this foot, and then this foot, and then flip the person and do it again, each foot got worked on twice. And thoroughly. The top and front of it, the bottom, and the arch side of it. And then the hands as well, when they get to supine. Okay. Now, we finally get to supine, and then we're gonna throw some skeletons down. We're gonna kind of just play with this as a group of moving the skeleton and getting a sense of like what it looks like in each position. And then after lunch, I'll have the skeleton still laying on some adjacent tables, but then we're just gonna team up and kind of just work our way through the beginnings of what a protocol like this would look like. And being able to work over clothing would be just like what you would do at even any like promotional event, you know? You're not gonna have people draped there. And although we'll have like chairs and stuff available at the ones we do, in the past, like the chair was the one I would go to occasionally. If people could, I understand if somebody's like wearing a dress or something, but the table is way more comfortable and a better like sales pitch of your skills, right? Somebody's got a neck and shoulder thing, I have them lay on their side and I'm like, nobody's done that. You know, it feels so much better, it's more effective. Yeah, I don't know if therapist does that. Here's my card. I'll see you next week, right? So, being able to work over clothing will be its own skill set. Either it'll be the same as if you have to work over the sheet with people. You have somebody that has difficulty navigating getting clothing off, stuff like that, then you have to be able to default to this. You being able to just do rhythmic compression without lotion can be a really valuable skill. All right, bolstering. Here in supine, thank goodness, this is it. But always do it, all right? The knee isn't usually in a too delicate a position in prone, but flat against the table here. If somebody has knee issues, that's usually a not more uncomfortable spot for them. So always under the knee. Okay. Now, there are some areas that we do not have to worry about as much. I have this listed, and some of it was just me having to play a numbers game with like getting a full 60 on there. I honestly do not work on the lower legs and feet in supine. I skip them entirely. And there's other areas even in this routine that I skip entirely, but that's my personal preferences. You'll want to be able to practice this, but just starting out knowing like, look, we already worked on this really good in sideline, right? So after getting good at just knowing how you could work on this in supine, it'd be an area where just for time management reasons and your body mechanics, I'd say, don't worry about it. I do the upper leg and work my way up real quick. So here will be its own thing to navigate. What you want to initially be thinking about is kind of dividing these areas into this section, you know, from the knee up most of the thigh. But then there's also the muscles about the hip. So there's the muscles that move the knee, and then there's also muscles that move the hip. Some of those muscles do both. But this is an area that people get tight chronically. Why? Because we're always sitting. So in a seated position, wear everything's short, wear everything is long, right? And the general blueprint for when people get messed up, I tend to assume everybody's stuck like that. All right, there's specific syndromes for this. There's upper and lower cross syndrome, which just means bad continuous posture for your shoulders and your low back. But this is an area that chronically is causing a person's hip and low back problems, but that therapists don't know how to work on because they're scared of the pelvis. Again, and it's just a forearm. And I don't even drape it, but the vast majority of people that I work with, I drape here, get the quads and stuff taken care of, and then it's over the sheet for here with a little bit of joint movement to make sure that's freed up. That way a person feels safe and comfortable, but I promise you, you're not gonna find a low back problem that doesn't cause issues in the hip. It will not happen. That's not how the body always has things to network together, all right? So here, what do? I find ways to work on angles, like that. Usually my angles, although this looks like it's downhill, I'm not doing this. I'm gonna stand on the side and work like 2 or 3 on these little angles like that. And then here, it's gonna be figuring out how do I find where the pelvis, this chunk of the pelvis ends, and then again where that greater trochanter is. And about right there, right where a pocket is where that forearm should be planted. Okay? I know that's a delicate area. The next one also tends to be a delicate area, but same principle, people get really short here. And if we want to help somebody with actual shoulder problems, figuring out how to work on the pecs, the chest muscles, is essential. And everyone here doesn't have to worry nearly as much. If I have like male students, sometimes I have to frame things about being extra cautious, but I don't have a lot of patience for that. It's a little bit relevant in my mind because of that think tank thing I talked about. But I'm like, everybody should be good about maintaining modesty and draping and stuff. Like it's not so I don't like things that frame it as one or another, or somebody needs to do something especially perfect. Like everybody should follow these patterns, right? And little things, you should not even assume that a male doesn't care that their chest is exposed. There was an interesting study, this a while ago, but it was like asked like a physical characteristic that even men tended to be most conscious of, and it was flabby chest. And so the idea that it's something to not worry about with men as much is you don't want to get into that. A nipple's a nipple and it shouldn't be undraped. It's as simple as that. So maintaining the modesty there will be essential, but working here in such a way that you feel safe and they feel safe is also essential. Thus, another forearm. I do not need to be right on their chest. I'm going to be right here along this seam. Okay, that's where the 2 big pec muscles are, and they sit on top of each other. So if I come here, and I have to navigate a few things when we are staring at this all together, the only thing you really have to 100% be sure you don't do is, elbow them in the throat or put an elbow on their collarbone, which would be calling the clavicle. The easiest way to do that is to not do something silly like that. So if I stand on an angle, I make sure my hand touches the table, and then let's let my forearm come down. I can't hit that clavicle, even if I tried. I'm gonna know where their arm is, because I'm gonna have their arm like this. This is what I'm gonna stress you doing. There's gonna be a few things for the hip in prone. I'm gonna have you moving the leg back and forth so you can find stuff more easily, that greater trochanter, all of that. But here for the chest, you're also gonna do the same thing. You're gonna bring the arm out. You're gonna be able to move it in this rotation pattern like this. That's gonna help you knowing that right here, if I'm drawing kind of a 90-degree angle, I'm gonna have my elbow come right down in between. Like I'm a 45-degree line between those 2 90-degree lines. Does that make sense? And if I just make sure my arm isn't like this, but actually hand touching the table, coming down, I can't miss, I'm not gonna hurt anything. And then this would be the initial part. And then moving out from that, then yes, there's more we could do here. But for most people, that will accomplish the majority of what you need to here. Just good compression, some joint movement, and you're on your way. Then remembering the nerve and artery here. So I'm already standing like this. So I might as well just start the massage like this. Looks exactly like we're working on the arm when it was in prone, right? Then arm goes back down. We're gonna do everything here. This is where I'll work on the fingers. We'll play with like some specific things to work good. In terms of like ticklish, it's not that I'm ticklish, but I find like light touch on the hands and feet just annoying. So like anything, you're gonna tend to give the massage that you would prefer to receive. That's gonna be your default. And we'll start with that, and then we'll have to like push you in either one direction or another. Like I struggle more with traditional relaxation, right? Which is where you predominantly need to be thinking. I have to kind of dial back and think. I have to really slow myself down and be nicer. But here, with the fingers, I'll show just like simple squeezes rather than like you overusing your hands. A really good squeeze will accomplish a lot there. And then we get to wrap everything up with just now that we've done everything and done the majority of the work on the neck and head, even and sideline, the rest is just putting a bow on it, something that feels good for the sake it feels good. If there's more going on here, then maybe I'd spend a little more attention, but you know, here's where we can just play with like some nice stuff and come up and do some head work. Esthetician in the room will know plenty more about working on the face than I usually do. I mean, I've done enough to be able to follow all those patterns and stuff, but a lot of this, you know, getting seated or what have you, is where we can just be doing something that feels nice for the sake of nice because we're closing down the session. You know, get yourself seated here. But even like situations like this, a lot of people get stuck working on the neck with both hands. Look what that does to my wrists, right? You think your fingers are lined up, but you do a lot of that, it's eventually gonna hurt something. So, easiest suggestion, if I did need to do more work here, is go on an angle. Do one side at a time. When we get to more nuanced stuff, I just found with one of the students over there, they had something very crooked here. And I went, oh, that explains a lot. And the way I was able to work with it was in this position, because I was able to be a little bit more precise and work one vertebrae at a time. But I've saved my hands through the entire session, so that then if I had to do more here, I can. And then here we go, nice scalp work. Follow the facial lymphatic routines, everything really nice. And then this one sticks with me for forever. I learned it in a system called polarity therapy, which is an energy system. And kind of just this, it's used in lots of stuff, some kind of like brush off to end the session. Then the last thing, oh no, I did my routine and not the, not the pattern. As it's listed here, and it doesn't matter which one you do, it should have been the this abdomen area. Now, I get that this is not a typical space that people are used to like working in massage. There can be really good reasons to be here, either for digestion, for breathing. When like more than halfway through, after those characters get done with the midterm, they're gonna be thinking like more system-specific stuff, like how can I help a person with digestive issues, with respiratory issues. And so it can be important for that. But speaking about the muscles, one tactic here that is really good, rather than like just working right here in the abdomen, is to do a pull that is able to stretch and pull all the muscles from the low back across and over to the front. And there have been many clients where that has been a key source of their issue. It's not specific to a muscle, it's more about the connective tissue. You hear like that myofascial release stuff. That has to be a fancy term you've heard somewhere. Sometimes it's that somebody has like a weird twist and it's lots of tissues tugged and twisted in. Lots of times for low back stuff, you do have a tendency to kind of get over-rotated in one direction versus another. So an easy way to navigate that is to be able to just, and it's a pull action like this. I'm just holding this so it doesn't flop on me. But it's also a case where from a customer service standpoint, somebody comes in, they have low back, neck and shoulders, okay? I can make sure in all positions I work on those areas. And that's how I could say to a person, I've customized it for your issue. So you have a neck thing, I could have worked on it a little bit in prone, really good in sideline, and then more here in supine. The most common problem people are gonna have is some kind of low back thing. And so then I would have worked on it in prone, sideline, and in supine. And they can't say I didn't customize the session for them. And you need to be, I have to, at the very least, get you ready for that, because you need them to come back, right? Our business is in a treatment plan that is many sessions, if not forever sessions. So having simple ways to just customize things, and that turns into work on it several times. All right, there. And everybody's so excited. I know, it's the morning. But we're past the word salad part. Now, quick break, bathroom. If there's sunshine, go stare at it, not directly at it. I'm gonna get one more table set up. We're gonna talk a little bit with some sanitation, but then I'm just gonna put the skeletons down and we're gonna together just kind of plot our way through real quick, doing exactly kind of what I did. Thinking about the pattern and just moving the skeleton, getting a sense of that, and then in the afternoon, we'll all team up and actually try to remember what it was like seeing the skeleton while you're working on an actual fellow human being.